saying that Malaysia Boeing that collapsed on Ukrainian territory, it was not their fault. And the main reason is that they cannot do this. They cannot deliberately attack or even accidentally attack civilian infrastructures or civilian airplane or something in the air. They cannot, but we can remember very well that in the beginning of this new democracy on the territory of Ukraine, during the exercises of Ukrainian armed forces, an airplane collapsed because of them, and the compensation was paid. They said that there was a mistake. This story should have continued, but it didn't. We can see the shellings of the residential areas, civil infrastructure. They use all the types of weapons. Not only experts know what Tochka-U missiles are. And it confirms that if Ukrainian regime says that they have nothing to do with Malaysian Boeing because they cannot even imagine that, they cannot even participate in attacks against civil infrastructure, it means that they can do that. They not even can. They do it, and they do it with pleasure. When the building collapsed, 5 people died, 6 injured. This is another terrorist attacks in order to intimidate the local civilians and spread panic among them. Our journalists are also the aim of Ukrainian forces. They selflessly perform their professional duty, and they are ready to sacrifice their lives in order to tell the truth to the world. And the future generations will refer to this truth as to the evidence of the criminal character of the Kiev regime and the selfless fight of our country for the future of the whole humanity. In the last days, correspondents have suffered irreparable losses. On the 13th of June, Ukraine Nazis attacked NTV film crew in Gorilovka. Cameraman Valery Kozhin died. Alexei Ivlev was injured. On the 16th of June, Ugledar was under attack, and photojournalist of News.ru Nikita Tsitsagi died. Russian law enforcement organs register all the crimes of Ukrainian Nazis. All the criminals are identified and brought to justice. As for the political evaluation of these events, we see silence. We do not hear anything from the international structures that are obliged, that have to say something about this because they're paid for that. They have to give their relevant evaluation, professional evaluation of what is happening on the Ukrainian territory, about this lawlessness against the representatives of the media. First, we tried the OSCE, but then we understood that the work of this structure is blocked by the US and the UK completely, by the NATO community in general. This structure is absolutely not functioning, but UNESCO continues to function. This is part of the mandate of UNESCO as a structure of the UN. And it has to react momentarily, immediately, to the security of the journalists. I'm not mistaken, am I? UNESCO dedicated many years to create norms and criteria of the security of the journalists, of their professional activity. It was the work of UNESCO. It had a lot of events on the freedom of speech, for giving the journalists the opportunity to work all over the world, to tell the world about the facts that they see, that they analyze. What do we see? Ms. Azoulay, French citizen, head of UNESCO, and now UNESCO does not pay attention to this topic at all. But they do not have the right to do that. The organization, or nor the organization, nor the Ms. Azoulay, this is their duty. And of what we see from all over the world, it seems that they have to receive money only for that, because they failed in all their tasks and all other tasks they have. Let's see to the cultures of the peoples and the civilizations. We can see this cynical activity of the West to impose their values, their subculture to the world majority. This is the topic where they can show themselves as an independent organization. And I'm speaking about the freedom of speech, security of journalists. But even in this task, UNESCO cannot do anything or cannot say anything, not just because it has fewer instruments, or maybe not enough budget. Maybe this is the fault of the US because they cannot pay their debts. But this is not the reason, because politically the work of this organization, of this structure headed by a NATO citizen, is being blocked. The courts of the Russian Federation, on the basis of the evidence from the investigative committee, continue passing sentences to Ukrainian neo-Nazis committing crimes against civilians. Life imprisonment in absentia is the sentence of the commander of the anti-aircraft missile artillery division of military unit 3057 of the Eastern Operation Territorial Association of the National Guard of Ukraine. This is the Nazi battalion Azov, prohibited in Russia. This is Lieutenant Grip, and he is on international wanted list. Under his order on the 2nd March of 2022, a bus with civilians was attacked and 4 people died then. Sergeant Major Kondrashov, who did this, is also sentenced to life imprisonment. Another soldier of Azov from the same unit 3057, Lieutenant Popjo, received 22 years in absentia, and he is also on international wanted list for the attempt to shoot at an armed man near Mariupol airport that was heavily injured on the 17th of March 2022. On the 11th of June, chair of the investigative committee of Russia, Alexander Bostrykin, had a meeting of coordination community to help children suffering from humanitarian catastrophes, natural disasters, armed conflicts and terrorist attacks. The topic was ensuring security of children during the special military operation. According to Alexander Bostrykin, since 2014, around 5,000 criminal cases were initiated against more than 1,000 people, leaders and political and military leaders of Ukraine, members of radical Nazi associations, militants. 6,139 civilians died in the armed conflict. 173 of them are children. 15,000 civilians were injured, and 734 of them are children. What does civilized West think about all of this? On the 13th of June, on the margins of the defense minister of NATO in Brussels, was the 23rd meeting of the contact group on defense of Ukraine, Ramstein format, an infamous Ramstein format. Lloyd Austin told that since 2022, Kyiv received armaments that account for $98 billion. You can imagine how many people in the world could be cured, could receive food, could receive education, how many people could be given a chance to have their own home, for the creation of jobs. Just imagine, $98 billion was allocated to the Kyiv regime only since 2022. But this is not everything. Let's put an asterisk. And there was no control. This is what Lloyd Austin forgot to say. There was no control. There was no accountability. No one knows how this money was spent, but it was allocated because this is part of the game. The liberal democracy of the White House is trying to enrich themselves, to enrich the structures that will allow them, the White House and the administration, to still be in power. But this was the only good news for Ukrainian regime. This was good news from the point of view of Lloyd Austin. The main topic of the meeting was the strengthening of the Ukrainian air defense and provision of F-16 to Ukrainian forces. But there were no decisions in this regard. Zelensky wants to receive new Patriot systems, but they will not receive them. And Americans had to refute the messages in the media about the plans of the Washington to give one battery of Patriot from Poland to Ukraine. There are more problems with the F-16. The Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg spoke about the situation, speaking on the 17th June in Washington Wilson Center. He twice misspoke when he was speaking, and this is the quote of the Secretary General. As for the F-16, this means the creation in the future of the NATO air forces. Oh, sorry, he added. Ukrainian air forces. Is it normal? Is it okay? But he said what it is in reality. He continued. Ukrainian air forces that will cooperate with NATO. Let's continue with the quote. Stoltenberg said, the aircrafts of NATO and pilots of NATO. And then he also tried to correct himself, saying that will be pilots trained by NATO. Some may say that this is a Freudian slip, but at the same time, this is like a bone given to the Kiev regime, to the Kiev regime political figures, for them to give this quote to the Nazi battalion, to other regiments, so that they could join this alliance, and the alliance is going to be together with the Kiev regime. Kiev regime is going to be part of NATO. But it seems that there are not so many of those who want such developments. That is why F-16 is not going to be provided at least until August. And Jens Stoltenberg spoiled the mood of Zelensky, saying that the condition. But just think before that. He said it publicly that the condition for Ukraine to be part of NATO is Ukraine winning over Russia. We leave away the context of what is happening in Ukraine right now, or our relation to the Kiev regime. Don't you think that it would be just, it would be honest to be gracious to Ukraine if NATO supports Ukraine, and maybe say all of this first before pushing it to the abyss with using Zelensky? Maybe they could say it in 2013, 2014, 2015, 16, 17.
And Mr. Stoltenberg and his colleagues to say for Ukraine to be in NATO as they promised only when they would be able to defeat Russia. How do you think? Would that influence their opinions in Ukraine? I think yes. I think that this would sober up those who were charmed by the words saying that the collective West will be building democracy in Ukrainian territory and will lead it to a bright economic and financial, humanitarian and scientific and cultural future. I think they would understand then that when they were called into this future, they were called only on one condition, that they would begin fighting Russia. To fight Russia, the collective West had to use the Kiev regime instead of doing it themselves. Where was Stoltenberg then with his promises and his revelations? How tricky is this regarding Ukrainian citizens? NATO understands, of course, they understand very well, and this Mr. Stoltenberg knows very well that this defeat will not happen. No one will ever vanquish Russia. Protracted efforts of Kiev to become the member of the bloc costed Ukraine its well-being. This will not be said by Mr. Stoltenberg or anyone. They are cynical enough and Russophobic enough, and they are negligent enough, not in regards to Ukraine, but to Slavic people in general. They will come to this. They will perhaps sometime in the future admit what was the reasoning behind this entire venture. But this very question still can be posed by the citizens of Ukraine. They can ask Zelensky, the Bankovaya Street, or anyone present there who is trying to drag them anywhere, trying to tie them to lampposts, digging them into trenches. Citizens of Ukraine can ask a question right now, at least as a final act, understanding that they have no future as part of NATO. What was it for? Why the Kiev regime was sending him into front lines? For this or what? I am convinced that European Union has the same opinion regarding Ukraine's accession to the EU. It's clear. Why? Because the European Union has become an economic subdivision of NATO. And the European Union has not grown accustomed to investing and developing into their new members for the sake of their future. And especially in regards to those who are not members of this union, they have accustomed to stealing, redistributing funds and assets to their own benefit. And the price that they expect Ukrainian citizens to pay, and Ukrainian society to pay, I can't even say the Ukrainian state because there's nothing left of it. This price has been marked. This is the goal that they put forward in front of the Kiev regime, to use them, using those money that has been provided by the West to inflict defeat upon Russia. And they continue to spew this nonsense into Ukrainian ears with the propaganda of Zelensky and his NATO curators. The defeat will not happen because it can't be happening by default. Now on the European tour of Zelensky, for the entirety of the last week, Mr. Zelensky and his accomplices were touring the Western Europe. On June 11 and 12, they've been in Germany to participate in a so-called conference on the so-called Reconstruction of Ukraine in Berlin. It's interesting how the Reconstruction conference is happening at the same time with the Rammstein group discussing what is there to ship in regards to deadly weapons, not to put a stop to combat. What do they call this foundation or fund or collecting money in the support of peace in Ukraine, a peace fund? This is the same thing. The money were sent to finance combat and combat efforts, and this was the goal behind this foundation organized by European countries. It's obvious that this event was intended to destroy, because a large number of those presents were the representatives of the military-industrial complex, which discussed the drafts of new arms shipments projects to the armed forces of Ukraine. Kiev was reminded of the necessity to fight corruption, and they were pointed to this struggle for the leading place in the European feeding grounds. And the decision to fire Mustafa Naim, the head of the Ukraine Agency on Reconstruction and Development Infrastructure, was cause for concern. The funds, around 16 billion euros, mentioned during the conference, testified to the desire of the Westerners to appropriate the resources of Ukraine, its industry and agriculture. They're not interested in the fate of Ukraine, nor its agriculture, nor its industry. They are only interested in the speediest and the most elaborate process of turning this territory into the future colony to serve their own interest. And everything else is just collateral. On June 13th and 14th, Ukrainian delegation was at the south of Italy, where the G7 summit took place. They reached a political agreement on the provision of a loan to Ukraine for $50 billion at the expense of using proceeds from frozen Russian assets. This is blatant thievery now being conducted by G7. This is exclusive information I'm going to share with you, that after the G7 was,
так сказать, в виде пресс-релизов наработал.
Press releases, they work through this, and the narratives that they issued regarding the extortion of $50 billion. Through different channels, they started to send us information that, you know, this wasn't us. Those were the other members of G7 who were going to steal information, funds from you, but we are not going to do. Every single member did this. And why did they said that they weren't going to do that? At least they understood that the response will be extremely harsh. Do you understand the level of the cynicism and the thievery and the conniving attitude of this whole complex to issue these endless reports of this pirate logic to appropriate somebody else's funds, and after that to go to the phone and try to beg us to understand that they won't do it, that they won't do it actually, because some other country of the G7 will do it, and not them, not the one who would be at the phone. But that's the essence of the ideology. This testifies to the fact that the money is scarce, and now we see that this aid has exceeded the amount of $100 billion. This is out of control. Understand that they have nothing to get the money from, and this was shown at the elections at the European Parliament, and European citizens are asking where their taxes are going to. The same situation is present in the United States and other collective West countries. That's why they are trying to resort to outright stealing. Just think about it. The decision of the G7, which posed itself as a flagship of the economic development, which is now under the influence of those liberal democracies, has descended into the whole of blatant thievery. They've been talking for many years about liberalization of trade, supply and demand, etc., on globalization, or the combination of liberal methods of economy management and protectionism, just to resort to blatant thievery at the end. There are prospects of a military defeat and political destruction of the Kiev regime. It frightens the United States and their allies. And there's no doubt that the stolen money will be sent for military purposes, procurement of arms for Ukraine, and this will only aggravate and protract the combat. This decision in the legal field would be called a criminal plot. And this only aggravates the blame of each of the participants. providing such loans to Ukraine, they are basically promising to continue to steal during a long term. If no one's asking whether the Kiev regime would be ready to return the loan, and we are yet to hear the Kiev regime saying how they are planning to do this. On the sidelines of the summit of the G7, Kiev signed a so-called security safeguard agreements with Washington and Tokyo. There are more than 10 such agreements on the part of Kiev, but not one of them is an international treaty status. This is a chimera. This is just trickery in regards to their own citizens, because they needed to bring some results from the meeting. That's why they are issuing these proclamations, those papers. Why do we call these papers? Because at any time these treaties can be stopped by unilateral meetings. But the Kiev regime is completely dependent on foreign aid. In the agreement with the United States, there is a point on Kiev's accountability in regards to the use of funds provided by the United States. They finally remembered, after spending $100 billion, that it would be good to report on the things that the money was sent for. This is being done exclusively to help the liberal democracies, liberal Democrats at the White House with the electoral campaign, because there are a lot of questions in United States. Where is the money they're asking from Mr. Biden? They know that he won't be able to answer on a whole range for a whole range of reasons. After the G7 summit, Mr. Zelensky received bad news that the European Council the Council of Europe decided to create a commission to fight corruption and appropriation of aid supplied to Ukraine. After 2.5 years, what are we talking about? What kind of commission? What kind of corruption? There is no corruption. There's just blatant banditism, which has transformed into terrorism. That's what happens all the time. Complete lack of accountability, which has been assisted by the United States regarding those who they are choosing as their allies. This creates extremism, because there is no other way. This is just science, it's just knowledge, pure knowledge supported by facts and theory. It's obvious that the United States and Europe, they not the elites, I mean, but citizens of those countries are starting to ask questions, because they doubt the legitimacy of Zelensky, and they understand that the money are just going into a black hole. Regarding the scope of those appropriations, they are just of a transatlantic scope. No one has any doubt about that. In Kiev, they wanted to conclude this tour by a Triumph of a Peace conference in Ukraine in Switzerland on June 15th, 16th, but something happened, something wrong happened, and the result was a total fiasco. Besides our own estimations, the Western press is viewing the summit in the same way. But I understand that Ukraine is not independent in any way right now, and there's nothing independent about Ukraine, and the very Department of Foreign Affairs in Switzerland, their Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Switzerland confirmed our estimations. On the 17th of June, we published exhaustive comments on that meeting. I will add only the following, that this meetup demonstrated the desire of the West to play the Ukrainian hand in combating Russia by any possible way. And thus is the rejection of discussing anything except the completely outdated Zelensky formula, and a lack of desire of this person to cancel the prohibition to hold negotiations with Russian leadership, and also the lack of mentioning racist laws, of disavowing racist laws directed against the Russian-speaking population present at the formula. We hope that the countries that have come up with alternative options to the formula will point attention to this circumstance and will complement their existing propositions If Washington, London, or Brussels wanted to establish peace or stop the bloodshed in Ukraine, they would stop to pump it with weapons incessantly. That's the direct formula. Supplement it, complement it, and add this to the initiative of President of Russia, which he spoke of at this very hall during his meeting last week with the Collegium of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This statement was published at the website of the Kremlin and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is the working formula. This is a true perspective for settlement. Regarding the Russian language, if somebody is still not understanding how sensitive and fateful this topic is for Ukraine, we see that there is an incessant combat against Russian language and people speaking it. The ban is legally enshrined in the country to use this in all areas of life, including science, culture, education, media, advertisement. And now we see that the followers of Bandera and Shukhevich are intending to control even the personal communication. I think that this was out of scope for Bandera and Shukhevich. I think that was more of a fiction made by George Orwell. He was publishing it in his novels on people that would become this victim of this liberal lack of accountability. Now it is prospering not only in artistic forms, but now we see it in the territory of Ukraine. The persecution against everyone who is trying to speak their mother tongue, at least in informal situation, is growing. The words of language ombudsperson Taras Kremin regarding the fact that pupils and teachers must speak Ukrainian at all times at school, but such requirements are not present at the discrimination laws. We see reports that in Lvov there was a creation of a language patrol consisting of local children watching the refugees from the east of the country not speaking the mother tongue, the Russian language at school. What is the ways of the implementation of this? But what would they do if those people would think in Russia? I don't know what Zelensky would do and what those children from Lvov Language Patrol would suspect that Mr. Zelensky is actually thinking in Russia, or perhaps even speaking Russian, which he is doing every day, actually. What would those children do, actually? We can't know what actions are supposed to in the case of such violations, but the fact of division of people into overseers and prisoners is not on language. When it comes to language, is not only immoral, but is a reflection of the very fascist order which is imposed by the Kiev regime, is being supported by the West. And the residents of the country are not in agreement with that situation. They're trying to resist in any way they can. Perhaps you saw the video from the so-called evening of networking in Odessa. We see that the audience is supporting Russian-speaking presenter who is interviewed with by those who are demanding him to speak the state language. This situation is a testament to the right of citizens to defend their legal right to use Russian language according to the Constitution, Article 10 of the Ukrainian Constitution. This very day, that was the day that Taras Kremen promised harsh reaction. And where is the OCE in that case? Where is the camaraderie of human rights defenders who receive huge funds of money, huge grants to propagate freedom of speech, to protect national minorities, care for language diversity? Where are all those who are calling themselves human rights protectors, human rights defenders at the OSCE? I don't know. Earlier, This language ombudsperson, the Sprachenführer, as we are calling him, called on the territorial center of the social support or the military commissariat to speak only in Ukrainian, stating that it's a prerequisite for unity and reinforcement of defensibility of the state. What is the scope of this madness with them? How would this reinforce the defensibility of the country? Everything is being supplied to Ukraine, is supplied by the Western countries. Then none of the inscriptions are in Ukrainian on this military equipment. This is not even a Krim, and this is not. He's like tough as a stone, I think. Dull as a stone. This expression is just tough to imagine. While those neo-Nazis are still in power, the country, the remnants of Ukraine, will only continue to degrade. The people will suffer. They'll suffer from those who are true occupying powers of Ukraine, those who have occupied Ukraine using United States money, those people that are sitting in Bankovaya Street. This is only small examples of the main trends. This only confirms the relevance of the goals of the special military operation, denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. Those goals will be accomplished, as was mentioned by the Russian leadership.
Вот, кстати, чуть подробнее.
But let's speak in detail about two get-togethers. First, G7, and the second is NATO meeting. I would like to speak about this in detail. First about G7 and then about NATO. There were many questions, and the main question was about the statement of G7 on the financing of Kiev regime from the profits from the management of frozen Russian state assets. They're speaking about $50 billion that will be paid through the income that West can receive in the future and reinvest in Russian gold and foreign exchange reserves. These are their wordings, but if we speak simply, Russian money just cannot leave the West in peace. It means that every country can lose their assets in the Western jurisdiction just because the US or US satellites are not content with its internal or foreign policy. Everyone sees like Washington, Brussels, and London and others use different kinds of pretexts to widen restrictive measures against the dissidents. Not only Russia or China, but all the countries of the global majority face such risks. Americans could think that the government maybe is not democratic enough or does not correspond to the scale of democracies that they have, and they could introduce unilateral sanctions. The pretext can be anything. For instance, oppression of their favorite LGBT. That is extremist ideology in our country. Or maybe geopolitical orientation. Not correct geopolitical orientation. It can be anything. Human rights. And it will be in very wide terms if we're speaking about its interpretation. Everything can be done to freeze someone's foreign assets. The reasons will be created very easily without a regard for law or even morality, because all of this was shattered and trampled by the collective West. We have spoken about this. We know about the consequences of these sanctions and manipulations with some others' property. This has disastrous consequences for world finance system that was created by the Westerners to ensure their dominance in global economy. No one is going to wait till Anglo-Saxons appropriate their assets for democratic purposes and the states of Global South understand it very well, and they gradually withdraw their assets from American, European finance havens that used to be safe. It's not surprising that Western currencies and reserve instruments become more toxic. The economy of these countries loses its competitiveness and attractiveness for foreign capitals. For the US, European, and other countries that are used to living beyond their means through neocolonial rents, endless loans, different manipulations with the finances that are absolutely artificial. And now this is the moment of truth for them. This debt bubble is backed by nothing but empty currency. Now we very rarely hear from even from the Western media the term of hard reserve currencies of the International Monetary Fund. And so this debt bubble can burst at any point. The reason can be anything, but the main essence, the main reason is obvious. Because they reached themselves in this race for pseudo-leadership. The consequences for the population of the states of the collective Western national economies will be considerable in the long term as well. This is the payment for stealing someone else's assets, organizing geopolitical adventures, not recognizing new realities of multipolar world, intervention using illegitimate instruments like illegitimate sanctions. This is payment also for the trade war against those countries that have themselves reached considerable results, although decided to use their own resources in the interests of their population, their national objectives and tasks. This is payment of the West for not understanding and lack of desire to recognize new centers of power like BRICS, SCO, and other associations of the world majority. Well, several words also about the next topic. I have to speak about it. I have to speak about the actions of G7, but I will repeat. Before G7 said that it is the association of the biggest economies. And now people cannot understand why all the communiques and the statements of G7, of all the meetings of this group, are related to Russia, and they discuss political aggressive plans. And no one can understand why has this happened. And now I invite you to remember how G7 was created. It was created as an association, as a forum, as a dialogue of the biggest economies. If these economies are not the biggest ones, and this is what it is, if we're speaking about economic indicators, and such indicators as the number of population, resources, prices, and the indicators of development, well, it means that now they're looking for a new agenda. They did not recognize that they could do something to keep being the biggest economies, and so now the agenda has changed because they are not the biggest economies of the world. Now let's pass to the facts. Well, I'm not going to speak about the insinuations about the Ukrainian crisis and different accusations against our country and our cooperation with other countries. We're not going to comment on that because we understand the objectives and tasks of the G7. Raising the heat of Russophobia and providing more and more armaments to Ukraine, widening the practice of secondary sections. They try to show their force and to provoke the polarization of international relations, to justify themselves before their population, find a pretext to legalize that they spend more and more money on their Ukraine project, and they have many other tasks. All of this contradicts the tasks of peaceful coexistence and development of states and people. I'm not speaking only about global majority, but about the whole world. Such actions show once again that the West is not interested in the peace anywhere. Washington has subjugated all the members of the G7 to their own confrontational Russophobic policy and the situation around Ukraine. G7 is not even playing coordinating role in the world economy. It is a political instrument that helps to preserve the hegemony of the US. But at the same time, they have the audacity to speak on the behalf of the whole world community on the important issues of the global agenda, trying to present the things that they reach as universal standards or ultimate truth. We listen to what they say in Italy. We see what they have written in their communiques, and we would like to ask, who are you? You're not even the whole collective West. I'll remind them for their self-identification. G7 accounts only for 10% of the population of the planet. How 10% can speak on behalf of everyone? Maybe have some very good economic indicators, maybe before they had. But they had them using some foreign resources. Now they don't. And their share in the world economy is steadily declining. They have lost their international authority. They don't have any influence. They don't have any results. That is why they're acting so aggressively. And they keep calling themselves the Big Seven, the Group of Seven, which is not truth. And they keep trying to impose their selfish interests, rejecting the rules of decency and openly ignoring the principles of the UN Charter. So the G7 summit was another milestone on the way to degradation of these associations, and it reminds us that the agenda of the US and their allies includes the imposition to everyone of the Western non-universal values, and it differs completely from what really interests the international community. It differs from the real problems on the global agenda. I would like to point out that the time of such associations as G7 has gone irretrievably. These countries have to admit their mistakes, disavow their statements, anti-Russian statements based on hatred, and to recognize objective reality of the forming multipolar world and conduct their foreign policy according to the new reality, according to their opportunities. And we see that they have fewer and fewer opportunities because they're based on nothing but ambition. Another get-together that we'll have to commit on the 13th or 14th of June in Brussels, there was the meeting of NATO Ministers of Defense. It is the final chance to compare notes before the summit and on the 9th, 11th July in Washington. The priority was continuing military aid to Ukraine and creation of the fund for obligatory support of the Kiev regime by NATO countries. I have commented on that, speaking about Ukraine. At the same time, it is confirmed that Ukraine has the role of an instrument. It's not even a puppet. A puppet, at least, does something. But Ukraine is just an instrument of the Washington and its allies in order to inflict strategic defeat on their enemies and also to deter our country. They spoke about their concerns about, and I think the wording is wonderful, about the activity of Russian intelligence and escalation of hostile activity of Russia in NATO countries. They agreed on the retaliatory decisive steps But in fact, this is a new campaign on spyomania and witch hunt. At the same time, they are supporting the election process in Washington. The story repeats itself. The accusations against Russia don't have any evidence. All of this is done to support the statements of American liberals that are trying to preserve their presence in the White House, and they need some kind of international support. NATO propaganda is exhausted. They don't know how to intimidate the population on the countries of NATO so that it could meekly agree with further militarization of Europe, increasing military spendings. 23 NATO countries will reach 2% of GDP that is allocated for armed forces and to buy new weapons. And before the summit, it seems that they'll keep pushing other members to show a high level of financial discipline inside the bloc. As Secretary General said, this is in the interest of the American military system because it accounts for 2/3 of military contracts of the U.S. allies. We're speaking about Western Europe, the Roman law, culture, education. Many things were given by it to the Western community, and now it is not going to receive anything. It only gives its resources and its opportunities to Washington. It just gave itself to them. And Washington has subjugated it. London and Washington has subjugated it. So they are deciding what Western Europe is going to do. It does not belong to itself. It does not belong to the people who live there, to the European continent. It has lost its independence. And it has become, I don't know even what to call it, something resembling a quasi-association of once great nations that lost all of their independence in making decisions, including existential decisions for them. Seeing the results of the Brussels meeting, we can say that the Washington, there'll be another anti-Russian get-together. They'll speak about building up tensions, building up forces and strike assets of the alliance near Russian borders, and also to provide support for liberal Democrats that are trying to preserve their power in the White House. A very important piece of news. Our foreign minister, together with the foreign ministry of the Belarus, have prepared the first report on human rights in several states. We published such reports personally, individually, but now we decided to do it together. This report will be published on the 20th of June at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock Moscow, so please follow the news on our site. The presentation will be held on the 3rd and the 5th of July during the conference, on the 56th session of the UN Council on Human Rights in Geneva and in headquarters of OSCE in Vienna. But I'm going to repeat that it's going to be published tomorrow at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. Well, the main result of the report is that the main problems in this area are related to the fact that some countries are trying to impose their opportunistic interests as some kind of universal norms. And this way, they implement their aspiration to introduce the rules-based order. As a result, we see that human rights norms are being introduced in some one-sided interpretation. We see bad faith efforts to undermine the main principles of international law through using the rhetoric of human rights violations in order to interfere into internal affairs of sovereign states. we do not see any hints of the Western countries to abandon their confrontational approach in favor of constructive international cooperation. And the much more serious concern is the connivance of these countries to the ideas of racism, the Nazism. And in the West, it has reached the scale of state ideology. For instance, the cancel culture, this is chauvinism. They block the work of the mechanisms working in the UN, OSCE, Europe Council. These mechanisms that deny, condemn, and reject the heroization of Nazism, racism, xenophobia, and intolerance.
The very study has been prepared by joint efforts of the MFAs of both countries differs from the similar United States and European treatises. It has no moralizing attitude. It's using the data from NGOs, human rights NGOs, and it considers the recommendation of international, universal, and regional mechanism in the area of human rights, the documents of committees of the UN system and regional human rights defending protection institute. Our report unifies fact-based information on human rights violations in the aforementioned countries, but the moral evaluation is up to you, the readers. Also, so to say, about human rights and its idea of human rights in the West. You know about the agents of foreign influence of foreign countries in our country. Some of them are left the country, some of them remain pretending to be opposition to the government. What are they doing? This is goes together with the question of human rights lexicon that is being used to protect human rights, as they say. What have they stooped down to? Currently, the pages of the United States Politico paper, we saw the publication by a duo of Mr. Khodorkovsky and Kasparov. They published the idea of a passport of a free Russia to stimulate immigration from our country. We see this tailoring of facts to suit the concept. There's a mix of propaganda. They don't care about the legal aspect of this initiative or any of these attempts. They are eagerly using the example of efficiency of the proposed mechanism by drawing parallels with the passport of free Russia, with the Nansen passport, a document issued to the white immigrants after the First World War, which was issued to people in immigration. This is an example of illiteracy. How could you subsume facts, portraying them as historical truth? The main goal of this article is to separate the citizens of Russia into loyal to the authorities and those who speak against it. Those who speak against it are proposed to be attracted to with some privileges and then to mobilize to fight against the Russian authorities. In my opinion, this surpasses all limits, and we can but notice the point regarding the demands towards the candidates to join this community of free Russia. The candidates would have to swear an oath to the ideals of non-systemic opposition and go through a testing period. What is this? What is this? If any historical parallels have been drawn in the 20th century, we have the only parallel, the infamous Ausweis. Do you remember the paper that was given to the residents of the occupied, Germany-occupied territories of the Soviet Union? The Fingerprints are needed to receive this passport, and they are planning to organize this at the platform of embassies of countries that immigrants are located in. This is the example of the degradation of those figures, and I'm even feeling a cringing attitude linked to this ignorance. Those people that they are trying to use people who have no sense of pertaining to a country, no sense of patriotism, to bolster their ranks. We also see the same decadent attitudes when we look at the Olympic movement. On the 25th of June, we celebrated International Olympic Day. This day takes us back to 1894, where French citizen Pierre de Coubertin declared the creation of the International Olympic Committee, the biggest sporting organization in the world. Perhaps few people could think that 130 years later, the ideals of the Olympic movement set out by him would be just stomped on by the current managers of the organization and their Western curators, and sports would be politicized. Perhaps few could predict that the sports movement would be so politicized, because the essence of sports is union. The essence of this international sporting movement is to reunite people. But here we see that this peaceful competition, the main principle of international sportsmanship, is just used as another instrument of bloodshed. We were forced to state with sorrow to the international sporting cooperation is in a deep crisis due to the efforts of the West and their desire to cancel the Russian sports. The heads of the International Olympic Committee and the Westerners are stooping down to bribery, threats, blackmail, and surveillance over Russian athletes and outright discrimination. I think that such actions damage the entirety of the sporting community and lead to degradation of the national sporting movement. By barring the athletes from competitions, they are damaging the competition and the interest viewers have towards the events. We will, on our side, we will continue to defend the rights of our athletes, and we will stand by the principles of the Olympic Charter and the human rights norms. And one of the main principles of the Olympic Charter is that sports is one of human rights, and everyone should have access to sports without any discrimination regarding the internationally accepted human rights in the framework of the Olympic movement. Our country is still committed to the equal sporting interaction with all interested countries and responding to the spirits and principles of Olympic movement, which excludes politicization and any conjuncture. And we invite all the athletes and everyone who is interested to participate in the sporting events that we are conducting in our territory based on the principles of the Olympic movement. The liberty, equality, desire, strive for peace, respect, and of course the understanding of sports as the physical culture. I wanted to mention an important date. 80 years ago, in June 1944, one of the biggest strategic operations, the Red Army, started, named after the prominent Russian general Pyotr Bagration of the Patriotic War of 1812. The main distinguished feature of this operation is the strategic scope and results of this operation. The Red Army, beginning their offensive on the 23rd of June at the front of 700 kilometers in length, have advanced 600 kilometers to the west. And as a result of the successful offensive, the Red Army liberated almost the entire territory of the Belarus, the majority of Lithuania and Latvia, and the eastern regions of Poland. During the first 12 days, the Army Group Center forces were completely crushed. On the 3rd of July, Minsk was liberated, and Vitebsk, Bobruisk, and Minsk area saw the surrounding of 30 German divisions. On the 17th of July, the central streets of Moscow bore witness to the march of 57,000 of German POWs. And this march continued for almost 3 hours. From the middle of July, the combat shifted to the Baltic Sea region and the Carpathian Mountains region. And Vilnius was liberated on the 13th of July despite active resistance. On July 17th and 18th, the Red Army crossed the state border of the Soviet Union with Poland. On the 21st of July, our forces liberated the prisoners at Majdanek, the concentration camp. The city of Lublin was taken on July 25th. By the end of August 1944, the extensive territories of Belarus and the significant part of eastern Poland was liberated from German occupation. Soviet forces made it to Wisla, to the outskirts of Warsaw and the border with Eastern Prussia. And the Hitler coalition was fractured, with Romania and Finland leaving it in September 1944. The Red Army was assisted greatly in the territory of Belarus by the partisans who conducted ambushes, were attacking the HQs of the enemy, were attacking communications lines, and supported the advancing forces. Also, I would like to mention that as part of the Belarusian front, the aviators of the French aviation regiment Normandy were fighting valiantly. And this regiment was given honorary nominative of Nemansk. The total losses of the German invaders in June-August 1944 amounted to 900,000 people. We created a new platform, a new stage of operations to conduct further strikes in the Baltic region, East Prussia, in Poland. The Bagration operation was remembered not only as a prominent strategic operation of the Red Army, but it also supported the actions of the armed forces of the United States and the United Kingdom that have started the D-Day on the 6th of June 1944. This offensive in Belarus forced the German high command to redeploy huge contingents to the east, bearing in mind that 70% of all forces of the Wehrmacht, up to 145 divisions, continue to fight at the Soviet front. And in his letter to Joseph Stalin of 27 September 1944, Winston Churchill mentioned that it was the Russian army who had gutted the German war machine and was occupying the most part of the enemy's forces. When Rishi Sunak and his policy considered it possible to celebrate the Day of Europe, Day of Liberation of Europe from the Hitler's forces in the European continent, its western part, and decided not to invite Russian representatives to the event, when this happened, they lost not only the conscience, not only the conscientiousness regarding our efforts, the sacrifice our fighters made, and the United Kingdom perhaps stopped respecting even Churchill. And while liberating Belarus, Soviet warriors of all nationalities manifested impressive heroism and battle mastery. 1,500 participants of the operation became heroes of the Soviet Union, and hundreds of thousands were awarded medals. Now, on the June 22nd, you know, this is a remarkable date in the history of our countries. In our tradition. It's called Day of Remembrance and Sorrow. The treacherous attack of the fascist Germany and satellites against the Soviet Union is still resonates with grief, pain, resentments for the crippled destinies of millions of people. And as usual, as ever, after conquering Europe, which submitted without fighting, the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, and this war lasted for 1,418 days and claimed more than 27 million lives of Soviet citizens. And the Soviet Union took the brunt of the strike of the Hitlerite Germany. It managed to break the back of Nazi movement and liberate the peoples of Europe from occupation. More than 75% of all losses and casualties of forces of fascist Germany and the Wehrmacht have been lost on the Eastern Front. We remember on June 22nd all those tortured in fascist captivity, those who died on the backlines in the occupied territories from hunger and hardships. We mourn for those who sacrificed their life to protect the motherland. The victory in the Great Patriotic War has always been a source of pride for us, because this has always been a time of the greats, of titans. Those people who defended freedom and the independence of our motherland were heroes, even if they don't call it themselves such. After the victory, it seemed that Nazism as ideology was defeated, was crushed utterly, and would not be able to raise its head again, and that the countries that birthed it will learn a terrible lesson forever. And those who felt the impact of fascism will never forget this. But the ideas of supremacy, exclusivity, and xenophobia have been resilient and have taken roots in the minds of Western elites to become an instrument, once again, of their Russophobic policy. It has been just muted for a time. They made it a taboo. But year after year, they were engaged in rewriting the history of the Second World War. They even tried to rewrite the history of the Great Patriotic War. The West consistently was forgetting about the decisive contribution made to the Germany's defeat. And after those blasphemous statements of the leaders of the Western countries who have appropriated victory in the Second World War, the result of this, we see at the example of those who don't remember their past, their ancestors, the very people who have ruptured the links with their forefathers by demolishing monuments dedicated to them. Those memorials have been struck down by the very people that issued from those people. In Ukraine, they have recreated Nazism based on the support of Nazi and fascist criminals who were pardoned by the Western elites, and their deals were preserved for the future as stockpiles. The historical disgrace of the West, those people that they preserved led prosperous lives, and they were respectable. They were entertained by the elites of the Western countries as if they tried to wash away the stigma of being Nazi henchmen. But you cannot wash away the stigma, because Nazism is not only an external manifestation. We see it we can see it just to point the source of the threat, but Nazism is deeply inside of them. This is something that lodged itself into the brain. This is something that this dehumanizing pandemic, which has no cure other than the knowledge of history, the self-reflection work, the separation of evil and good from each other, and the preservation of historical memory. Not even 80 years later, the Anglo-Saxons tried to use Nazism as a ram to defeat Russia. But now this role is given to the Kiev regime. After the beginning of the special military operation, the collective West instantly started the campaign to cancel the Russian culture, the Russian sports, literature, and in general, the Russian people.
Санкции
It introduced tens of thousands of legitimate measures against us in the economic sector as well. They understood who elaborated all of this. They imposed this sanction against people who work, who every day do their professional duty. They knew that they imposed this sanction not only against Russia people, but against people all over the world, because this affects all the corners of the world. But they think they can do this because they're exceptional. They are this garden that can do anything, this golden billion. At the same time, they wage war on the monuments to those who liberated Europe, the monuments to the heroes of the Great Patriotic War being demolished, to the warriors who liberated Europe. And I'm not speaking about only the military monuments, but also to the Russian classics. They are trying to finally bulldoze through the historical memory of nations. The coup d'etat in Ukraine 2014 showed that the collective West does everything to turn Ukraine into anti-Russia, to revive the ideas of Nazism and neo-Nazism, nationalism, glorifying the henchmen of Hitler, Bandera and Shukhevich, having torch marches, canceling Russian language, which most of the Ukrainian citizens speak and think in. In practice, we see the Nazi Germany of 1930s, the oppression and sometimes medieval harassment. We could just remember the mass burning of people in trade union house in Odessa in May 2014. We can remember persecution of those and harassment, abuse against those who were held captive. Just remember what was said by President Poroshenko, that those who didn't swear allegiance to these ideas will always live below the ground, and all the others will have all the benefits. So this medieval abuse is what Russian-speaking people in Ukraine face. Without any trial, dissidents are being persecuted, abused against. People are being dragged to military offices, to inscription offices. They do everything for this ideology to keep existing. First, they reached those who were speaking Russian, and now they put on this altar of neo-Nazism the lives of the civilians, of the citizens of Ukraine, even those who swore allegiance to this neo-Nazism. And we spoke about this. We spoke about this for many years. Nationalism, neo-Nazism, fascism are the evils that afterwards consume those who created them, because they always need blood and victims, regardless of the initial causes or initial objectives. Let's see what is happening to the political opposition of the Kiev regime, what happens to the persecution of the canonical or Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They tried to exterminate the residents of Donbass. Ukrainian Nazism was nurtured from the outside. It was armed from the outside by the collective West that is a proxy party to the conflict in Ukraine. Being the heirs of the generation of the great victor, we do not have the moral right to see the return of the Nazi ideology. We remember the terrors of Nazism. We remember the efforts that were needed to defeat it, and the work that was not done properly by the West to eradicate Nazism now yields its terrible results. We honor the memory of our fathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandfathers that died in the Great Patriotic War. We will always remember the heroism of those who were not on the front but on the back lines. They sacrificed not only their lives but their health in order to reach the victory together with the front. In the context of the special military operation, our military continues to fight for the just cause, fighting against this Nazi hydra. We thank all those victors who gave us future and life and peace. Eternal glory to those who fell for the freedom and independence of our motherland. Eternal memory to them. And I'm ready to answer your questions. International Life, are you here? Hello, Ms. Zakharova. You spoke about Jens Stoltenberg today. I would like to point out the next thing. The countries of the alliance started consultations on having nuclear weapons in readiness. How could you comment on that? You know, this is a very interesting story because, first of all, we heard the statements, some kind of... Then it was published on the Telegraph, and Stoltenberg was the one who gave the interview. And then it was disavowed by the official representatives of the NATO. I think journalists have to find out if he said it or no. And now let's return to the question, to the essence of the question. Well, it's very important to say, if we're speaking about the British journalists spreading fakes, they started blaming Russia for propaganda. This is just surprising. Maybe this is the mistake of the British journalists. We remember how they tried to incriminate the British establishment. For instance, it was Reiter. They said that the British leaders didn't say what this media said. But after several hours, the journalists of Reuters supported their version of the events. But Telegraph couldn't do that. That is why they decided to relate all of this to Russian propaganda, but Russia has nothing to do with that. Telegraph and Stoltenberg should figure out themselves if he said it or not. So they just used well-used anti-Russian templates, not even seeing global communication problems that they have. As for the question itself, if we're not speaking about the readiness of the weapons that are provided for joint nuclear missions of NATO, this destabilizing practice continues to be a very serious problem for security on the continent. It is mentioned these missions are based on the deployment of the US of its nuclear weapons in Europe. This is located 2,000 kilometers away from the national territory of the US, and it can reach the territory of Russia. Our demands include the withdrawal from Europe of all the American nuclear weapons and all the infrastructure that could be used for its deployment. Thank you very much. Another question. The other day, the representative of the OSCE on the freedom of the media, at the end of his mandate, accused Russia of the catastrophic situation of the media in our country, and he was speaking about security on all the space of the OSCE. What can you say about that? You know, it's very interesting. When the mandate ends, people stop working somewhere. It is not what's happening. You said very correctly. Ribeiro was not speaking about the end of work, but about the end of mandate. Maybe before it was the same in the OSCE, but now it is not like that. Her mandate ended, but her work didn't. This is the shame of the Portuguese diplomacy. She was presented as a great professional when was nominated for this post. She was presented to the countries that were supposed to support her nomination to this post. But in fact, she didn't do anything, and it costed a lot. Through all this time, which she was not doing anything, she was not working. There isn't any word to call this type of activity. So this, in one of the most terrible examples of the biasness of this organization, of the work of this person as the representatives of the OSCE for freedom of journalism. Remember how people who had this post in the OSCE truly use their professionalism and their personal characteristics to counter the terrible trends of destructive influence of one country against their work. They had some kind of balance. They used their professional capabilities to implement the mandate that they have. But Ribeiro didn't even try to do that. She personally participated in the segregation of the journalist community, in separating journalists for bad and good ones. In the recent years, we haven't seen anything but biased statements from Teresa Ribeiro that has nothing to do with the mandate she has. She ignored the persecution and abuse against Russian correspondents. The terrorist attacks of Ukrainian forces against Russian correspondents raises a lot of questions, not only about her professional capabilities. We have evaluated her because she doesn't have them. It raises a lot of questions about her human characteristics. So she failed in her mandate. It resulted in the collapse and degradation of this mandate. This is not crisis, this is dysfunction. Media issues are the most politicized in this structure. If we're speaking about the security of journalists in OSCE, we need to ask them. And this structure has to explain to the members why it kept silence when there were terrorist attacks against journalists, against Daria Dugina, Vladlen Tatarsky, Mr. Kokov, Vladislav Zhuravlov, Mr. Maksudov, Mr. Yeremin, Mr. Kozhin, Nikita Tsitsagi. There wasn't any condemnation, any formal condemnation against those who did it. I'm not speaking about giving facts. They didn't even say anything. She just heartless person who doesn't do anything. There are a lot of restrictions of the OSCE against Russian media. They deliberately ignore the rights of Russian journalists that do not work according to the Western norms. They push away Russian media from their OSCE space. She ignored everything. This balance between the work of the office and the organization itself means the degradation in the access to the information in the OSCE countries. And it is a detonator, which many people are discussing, which will result in the collapse of all the structure. She contributed personally to it. The main result for us of the quasi-work of this person means that this institute was usurped. In fact, it was maximally politicized. That is why it is necessary to reform it deeply. We need to reform it, restructure it, somehow change it. The main thing, the principles of this, the work of this institute should be new, because we can face this situation when the representative of this institute does not help to solve problems, but creates problems and the violations. But we need to understand that if the OSCE is capable of reforming itself, not the opportunity, but the capability. A great cluster, the block of its work is being usurped. So the question is how it can implement changes to become more effective. RIA Novosti, are you here? Hello. We're here. We have one question. On the 13th of June, the US, Canada, and the UK issued a joint statement where they accused Russia of undermining democratic process of Moldavia, inciting protests, using criminal groups, corruption schemes, and disinformation. At the same time, they declared support to Maria Zakharova in the fighting against Russian destabilization just before presidential election and referendum on Euro integration. How would you comment on the situation in Moldavia? Well, you have two questions. Well, this is just part of one question. They are in the same context. Yes, I understand. I think that this is another fake or another attempt to support Sandu regime anyway by the West. But, you know, they paid her directly and she has Romanian citizenship. And she supports all the Western narratives. That is why the citizens of Moldavia feel more and more the results of the Sandu activity, the administration of Sandu. We're speaking about the survival of the people, the culture of Moldavia. So she needed some kind of support from the outside. That is why 3 countries decided to do that. And the essence of the statement is like presenting everything like it is not as it is in reality. So, in fact, we hear some accusations, baseless accusations against our country. Even, for instance, we are to blame in the problems of Moldavia, as they say. This is an attempt of somehow to blow the process of turning of the republic under the administration of Sandu, that is supported by the West, in making Moldavia a dictatorship, in order to protect the country of the so-called enemies of democracy. And this is done because her rating, her popularity rating is very low. Well, I think that we should base on the evaluation of this statement by independent Moldavian experts, but they didn't have any unanimity in their evaluations. Some say that it's an intervention into the internal affairs of Moldavia, that it is being governed from the outside. But this is something classic. The Westerners do this to support each other during election processes, literally saying that they have some preferences about the candidates in some other countries. Remember presidential elections where there were different opponents, for instance, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the US. and other members of NATO said that they had some obvious preferences. These were the words of the leaders of states, and they made statements. There were interviews and comments. I'm not even remembering that. There was thousands of words that were said. They directly used their official post, being the leaders of different countries, intervening into the election process in the US itself, speaking about their preferences, saying that Hillary Clinton is the best candidate for them. I will never forget the journals, the papers, U.S. papers that were supposed to be published with the photo of the future president. Even before the election, everything was prepared, but some leaders, like Hollande, for instance, even sent their words of congratulations to her. This is the values of the Western world, but in fact they're anti-values. We're speaking about non-interference, and they interfere into internal affairs of other states. They form electoral preferences from the outside for sovereign states. They speak about pluralism, the freedom of speech, but at the same time they do everything for the Moldavian forces to keep closing all the media that are not mainstream.
What else? They speak of cultural identity, independence as part of human rights aspect, formulating it as minorities' rights. They applaud it when Madam Santos speaks that there's no Moldovan language, no Moldovan identity. They are all Romanians by nationality, and there are a lot of examples of this. Economy, there's nothing to talk about. Where is this touted liberalism? We see that the example of the Madam Santos government, nothing. We see nothing of that. We see corruption-like management in the interest of Western corporations and not in the interest of their own people. In general, we closely monitor the situation in Moldova. We clearly understand that beside the thing that we mentioned today regarding the revisionism and the neoliberal values used as pretexts to destroy the traditions and morality and national Moldovan identity. This is the 80th anniversary this year of Moldova's liberation from the German and Romanian occupation forces, and official Chisinau is still trying to whitewash Hitlerites and Hitler's henchmen. This is just puzzling because Madam Santos made her choice to whitewash the collaborators. On June 13th, there was a ceremony of commemoration of Romanian soldiers, and I quote the statement of those who remember them. Those soldiers sacrificed their lives to liberate Bessarabia in summer 1941. And in Falești town, there was a commemorative action to commemorate Romanian heroes who died during the Second World War. What Romanian heroes they're talking about? Perhaps Romanian partisans? No, the Romanian collaborators. On the eve of those blasphemous demarches, the authorities made some statements regarding the anniversary of the 1941 deportations, using this difficult chapter in the history to denigrate the period of Moldova's stay as part of the USSR. And the authorities of Moldova also tried to propagate the European project to turn this republic, as they say, as into a space of freedom, peace, prosperity, and confidence in tomorrow's day. But they need just to reject the fact that they are Moldovans, to inscribe themselves as Romanians, and voila, everything will turn out as they desire. That's the project of Madame Sandu. The true delights of the European future were demonstrated to the residents of Moldova during the LGBT parade, which happened in Chisinau on 16th of June. This parade was called the Pride March. Perhaps, that's the sort of pride they deserve. Under the reinforced police escorts, the representative of Western diplomatic representations and missions took part in this event, and the congregation was bolstered by the tourists from the Western countries. Everyone has their own perceptions on life and how to do things in their life, and we mentioned this today. But regarding pride, there's nothing to be proud about. Not to say about walking in the street without underwear, swinging it in the air. But there were no Moldovans ready to do this, so they had to ensure their representatives by attracting Western participants. Perhaps for the Western diplomats, perhaps it's a mandatory events, or they are doing this for the leisure. They walk in those LGBT parades in the country of their stay. I don't know. If you think about it, this is completely nonsensical. And the Moldovan residents preferred to attend the events of 15th, 16th June, events that were proclaimed in favor of the protection of traditional family values. According to surveys, around 85% of Moldovan citizens are against same-sex marriages, and they hope to protect traditional morals and values. They don't need to think about those new normals and to preserve the normal situation that used to exist, like tradition. And we see, according to the media reports, that some traditionalists were arrested during the manifestations. But when we look at pride parades, pride marches, LGBT parades, they are allowed to walk in the center of the city. But if you protect the traditional values, you can be arrested. One more manifestation of this pseudo-democracy on behalf of Madame Sandu's regime was the suspension of the head of the famous dance ensemble of Moldova called JOK for the participation in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And if I mentioned this, if I didn't mention it, you wouldn't believe it. Some of the dancers of this ensemble took part in the cultural program of the Moldovan Garden as part of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Just so you know where you can dance and where you can't, actually, because they were suspended after returning home. This is just a disgrace. This is everything that I'm talking about. They are confirmations of information where Moldovan residents return to airports of their own countries. They are being persecuted. The common sense is completely twisted. We see an amoral policy in regards to Moldovan residents with the Maria Sandu's regime, where people are being detained upon arrival, being interrogated. Their passports are being torn up. And the result of this policy course of Chisinau is a catastrophic demographic situation in the country. According to official data, in 2023, the population decreased by 69,000 people, and during the 3 years of Maria Sandu's presidency, it decreased by 203,000 people, by 8%. This is a country that is not experiencing any attack on the part of international terrorist organizations or is not engaged in any combat protecting its borders. No, it's just a normal situation. It's just the result of the values that people are fleeing from. a number of newborns has decreased by 11% throughout the last year because the current authorities have not created a good environment for the growing generation. The absolute poverty, abject poverty among children exceeded 30% in the rural areas. In rural areas, we see this number at 44.6%. I see how the majority of Moldovans, we see it in social surveys or while talking to the citizens. We have weekly forums and events where the residents are present, or perhaps meeting them in the street. I see how they understand everything that's going on, but they're trying to resist it too. They understand that their interests have been infringed upon, that they are being teased, that this Madam Santos policy is akin to genocide. They are thinking not only about themselves, they're thinking about future generations of Moldovans, because they understand that the current policy of Madam Santos can lead the country to a true disintegration, to fall into the abyss. I'm convinced that all the attempts to subsume the national identity and rich history and tradition of the Moldovan people by those pseudo-European values are doomed to fail. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes, good afternoon. What do you think is the reasoning behind the revocation of signatures behind the communique of the peace summit that happened in the recent weekend in Switzerland? I mean, the representative of Iraq, Jordan, and Rwanda. Was this the result of the Russian diplomatic actions? I will remind you about the numbers. We gave a profound commentary on June 17th, but I would like to remind you once again that the final communique with the anti-Russian, obviously anti-Russian character, was signed by not every country that attended the conference. First, 12 delegations, then 14 delegations refused the signature, among them India, Indonesia, Jordan, Iraq, Mexico, the UAE, the Saudi Arabia, Thailand, the South African Republic, and other prominent states. We don't preclude the possibility of those countries, or number of those countries increasing. It's obvious that the world majority sees this initiative not as a recipe to ending warfare. They see the true desire of the Western countries, that is to push through the agenda intended not to reach peace, but to continue the warfare. They don't want to follow this dangerous ideology, this dangerous course. I think that the world will continue to realize and be reinforcing the realization that the real way towards peace is the cessation of any arms shipments and the things that were mentioned in the statement of President Putin, who declared his proposition during his statement in the MFA building on June 14th. The very program, the proposition, this ideological peace that could become the coveted way to reach peace. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. The questions that we wanted to ask you, you already partially answered it regarding the EU's plans to use proceeds from Russian frozen assets to give Ukraine $50 billion of aid. Russia has repeatedly called this blatant thievery. However, when will Russia give a response to such actions? And perhaps you could, at least generally, shed the light on the details regarding the specifics of this answer. We mentioned that our country has a significant volume of Western assets, both property situated in Russian jurisdiction. Everything can be subject to the response policy of the Russian Federation, and the character of these actions will not be revealed to you by anyone. The arsenal of political and economic countermeasures is quite broad, and once again, I will not tell you directly the exact countries, but you can clearly see for yourself that there's just 7 of them in the G7. We received some info from their, not just from envoys and messengers, but we receive direct signals from their capitals that they have nothing to do with such decisions of the G7. They will not do it just because they understand that the expenses borne due to this such actions will be, softly speaking, quite damaging for them. This is not accidental. We understand that. Those things are put in motion. We understand we can't really put a stop to this. If you don't have any questions, we go further. Is news.ru with us? Yes, good afternoon, the news.ru. Madam Zakharova, thank you very much for remembering our colleague Nikita Tsegage. Rest in peace. I will just my condolences to his family. I just wanted to say a little something. Let's do it. You can see that we appeal to UNESCO even. I'm not even talking about the OSCE because there's no one to talk to in there. Don't you want to use our capabilities, our diplomatic channels, to send everything you need to UNESCO directly in regards to the loss that you've suffered as a collective? It will be a pleasure to do this because, once again, we do our own work. We have our own work cut out for us in the nearest future. There will be confirmations for that. But we, with pleasure, will use your position as a media outlet, if you have it. Perhaps the very scope of the tragedy is understandable, and the situation of the close relatives is understandable, but perhaps they could find enough strength to address some words, make a statement to the organization that has its calling in protecting journalists, but unfortunately is not currently engaged in that. Yes, we will think about it, because you understand, the thing is, I don't really believe the thing, but perhaps the official statements that we are making, perhaps they will not affect international functionaries, but perhaps something will stir inside them if they hear the words or will read the words from the colleagues of the deceased. For who, if not for our identity, our status as members of one culture tradition, they wouldn't be able to hear. So if you have the opportunity to give a communique, perhaps that we could transfer this to UNESCO, yes, we will take into account. We will return to you we'll get back to you with information. Our first question relates to the military-technical cooperation between Yerevan and Paris. They've concluded an agreement to supply the self-propelled artillery pieces called Caesar to Armenia. What could be the consequences of that deal? We see that Paris is provoking another stage of this increase of tensions. We've already mentioned this. We see another confirmation of this. The authorities in France is interested not in the best for Armenia, or not even in the interest of a singular people. Paris desires to use the current disagreements between countries or inside countries as an instrument to reach their own political goals. And by those political goals, I mean not only the personal interests of the Elysian Palace, but as France, as a herald of NATO policy. Perhaps that's the way we should treat it. Thank you very much. For second question, Hürriyet, the Turkish media outlets said that they helped prevent a second terrorist attack in Moscow besides Crocus City Hall disaster. Is there any truth behind this information? Such things pertain to the competence of special services, competent authorities. They give commentaries considering the sensibility, the vulnerability, and the sensitivity of this topic. And I think this field is left for specialists to respond to. I can only say that we maintain contacts on all levels with our Turkish colleagues. We discuss all the questions on the agenda. Thank you very much. Is Verelk with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions today. The first question concerns the fact that lawyers of Ruben Vardanyan said that he was subjected to torture in Azerbaijan's captivity. What is the reaction of Russia regarding this illegal detainment of Mr. Vardanyan, the former minister in Artsakh? Is this question of his liberation raised during the meeting between Russia and Azerbaijan? I would like to answer with a question. Perhaps you didn't see it. The issue of Ruben Vardanyan's current whereabouts. Ruben Vardanyan is not currently a citizen of the Russian Federation. Whether he is currently in prison during the Azerbaijan. Is this question raised in Armenian and Azerbaijani context? Perhaps this question is worked out during those consultations. If you could return to me with the answer, this would be interesting to me, because I would like to remind you that Ruben Vardanyan left the Russian citizenship. It's not a secret. This is not some unchecked info. I think that such questions should be addressed to Baku and Yerevan.
I understand why you're asking this question. You related to the regional situation. I'll remind that Russia is in favor of comprehensive Armenian-Azerbaijan normalization in the context of trilateral agreements at the highest level of 2020-2022. This process also includes the solution of humanitarian issues like the return and exchange of all the people that are being retained, also the treating of cultural and historical monuments, memorials, exchange of information about the search of people that gone missing, and we regularly provide the signals to the both parties. And the second question, yesterday Mikhail Galuzin in the interview to Komsomolskaya Pravda said that the transition of Armenia under the umbrella of the US and NATO will be impossible to preserve the unique defense area of the Russian Federation in the context of CSTO. And there was information in the Telegram channels that Russia could reject any negotiations with Armenia on the provision of weapons and military equipment, responding to this policy of Yerevan. Is this true? Will Moscow review its relations with Armenia if we're speaking about military and political and economic aspect? You're speaking about the interview of the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mikhail Galuzin. It was published by Komsomolskaya Pravda. This is true. I can confirm that. All the evaluations were given there. As for the information about the provision of the military products, you should go to the Ministry of Defense and the Federal Service on Military and Technical Cooperation. As for the military products that are being provided to foreign countries, they're being implemented according to the demands of the necessities of the special military operation, and we have repeatedly spoken about that. There are some types of weapons and military equipment that are related to military technical cooperation, not only with Armenia, but also to other partners. As for the context with Armenia and military and technical sphere, we do not reject them. We regularly have them, and we didn't have any claims from the other side. Big Asia, are you here? Yes, Ms. Zakharova, we are here on the 10th of June on Seoul. There was the third meeting of the American-South Korean Consultative Group on Nuclear Issues that After that, South Korean media said that the representatives of two countries finalized the concentration of the actions for a possible nuclear attack from the DPRK. They discussed joint planning and implementation of nuclear deterrence, integration of nuclear weapons of the U.S. and South Korea. The ambassador of Russia in South Korea, Georgy Zinoviev, signalized that Japan shows great interest to the work of this consultative group on nuclear issues, and it also interested in deploying nuclear U.S. weapons on its territory. This information means that the scale of aggressiveness of the U.S. policy in Asia-Pacific is growing, and is it justified to link such signals from Seoul and Tokyo to the intention of the Americans to keep raising tensions in the confrontation with China? Well, in your question, I would just leave question marks or everything you said and would make it a confirmation. And that would be my answer, but I cannot do that. That is why I can say that these meetings of this American South Korean consultative group on nuclear issues held in Seoul on the 10th of June. This is another proof of the aggressive policy of Washington on the Korean peninsula. All of this provokes further escalation of tensions, undermines peace and stability. The running in of scenarios of hypothetical armed conflict with the use of nuclear weapons pushes these sub-regions to the verge of a nuclear disaster. Is this intentional? Yes, it is. This is their dream. They're dreaming about this. They could undermine everything. They could destabilize completely another region, turn Korean Peninsula to Middle East number 2. That would be great for them. Why? Because they could be new. That would provide new contracts for military industry of the U.S. It would be another opportunity to show to their own citizens their own exceptionalism and how they can, to show them how they can work inside this chaos, so they could raise the stakes at international affairs. These are their favorite methods that they could use in this scenario. But at the same time, they could create a headache for other countries in the region. They could, create another front. If during the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War, the Second Front was something useful, something correct, something long-awaited in the fight against fascism of our country. In this case, we're speaking about a new front of the collective West. This is completely the opposite. This is another front line organized by the collective West in order to put the planet, introduce planet, like drag the planet into another confrontation. And we're not only about speaking the problems and related to DPRK, also to deterrence of China and Russia. They're speaking about the threats of China, but who created these threats? DPRK was retaliating the threats created against its own country. We're following the intensifying of military and political cooperation of Japan with the U.S. and regional allies in Asia and Asia-Pacific region. This is part of their double deterrence policy against Russia and China. Tokyo and Japan for the U.S. is another instrument of fighting not only against our country, but first of all against China. And the U.S. sees like this many other countries, for instance, Ukraine. But the question is if Japan wants the same destiny as Ukraine. Japan is being used to destabilize the situation in the Asian Pacific. they had great opportunity. We had great opportunities for cooperation with Japan, with the people of Japan. There would be many economic benefits, great opportunities for exploring the resources of this region. There could be many interesting projects in business, economy, finance. We could respond to the common challenges, if we're speaking about natural disasters and other things. But all of this was trampled by the U.S. hegemonism that thinks that the countries are its vassals or its instruments. We have repeatedly pointed out the threat for the region of the course of the anticipation of Fumio Kishida administration course for accelerated remilitarization of Japan, including consecutive steps to dismantle pacifist restrictions of the post-war constitution to create the offensive potential of the country. We're also concerned of the plans of Tokyo to blur the national nuclear-free status in the format of participating in the joint nuclear missions of the U.S. together with NATO countries, having multilateral exercises with the use of strategic bombardments that are certified to implement nuclear tasks. At the same time, there are prospects of deployment of American medium-range missiles on Japanese islands. This would create potential threats to the Far East of the Russian Federation, and this would mean adequate retaliatory measures from our side to support the defense of our country. The President spoke about this the last Friday on the 14th of June of the 2024. He spoke about this, saying that this is necessary to create the Eurasian security architecture. Golos Otechestov, the voice of Fatherland, are you here? Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have one question related to the migrants from the former Soviet Union republics. There is very aggressive rhetoric against these migrants. Excuse me, I have a question. When you're speaking about people coming from the former Soviet Union, you're also speaking about me because in my passport it is stated that I was born in the Soviet Union. No, we think that they are our compatriots because they protected our motherland. You yourself call yourself someone coming from the Soviet Union. Yes, of course, without any doubt. Well, I think we should be more respectful. We should not segregate people because everyone who was born before the dismantlement of the Soviet Union are those who come from the Soviet Union. We continue, we are the country that continues the cause of the Soviet Union. Every other country can have other principles, but we all were born in the Soviet Union. So let us be more respectful in our rhetoric, which would be useful to find solution for all, find answers to all the questions you're going to speak about. Thank you for your comment, because this is our question. These are our compatriots, in fact. We have great past, great fatherland that they were protecting, and now very aggressive rhetoric is being used against them. At the same time, on in their native countries, they are suffering because of the propaganda of the Western media that makes them feeling some bad feelings against the Russians. Can we somehow influence the position of the media? And you have already spoken about your position already. Are you speaking about the mechanism to influence the media? I don't know anything about such mechanisms. We have a law about the media. Maybe this is a mechanism of influence there is legislation that regulates information activity. We're speaking about speakers and of the government organs and the media. We have the concept of the policy and the plan of its implementation. So many things are stated in our national legislation. We have doctrinal documents, and this should create this favorable space that you are speaking about. If we're speaking about provocations against people that would impede them, this would create opportunities for people. It would create opportunities for respectful treatment of people. Thank you. If there are no questions more, then I'll see you next time. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.